My parents forbade me from their anniversary party. Hours later, my sister posted, "True family." I commented, "Congrats. The $150,000 refinance debt is officially all yours now." 5 minutes later, panic ensued. My name is Madeline. I am 32 years old, and for the past 3 years, I have been the invisible pillar keeping my family from completely collapsing. I live a quiet, highly structured life in Albany, New York, where I work as an architect. My job is literally about building strong, reliable foundations for other people, ensuring that structures do not crumble under pressure. It is a bitter irony, really, because my own family's foundation has been rotting away for decades, and I was the only one holding the roof up. Every single month, on the first day of the month, right around 8 in the morning, my phone would light up. It was never a text from my mother, Cynthia, asking how I was doing. It was never a call from my father, Gregory, seeing if I wanted to grab dinner. No, it was an automated push notification from my banking app. It was a simple, sterile message confirming that the mortgage payment for my parents' house had been successfully deducted from my checking account. I would stare at the screen, watch a massive chunk of my hard-earned salary vanish into the digital void, and feel absolutely nothing. Over time, the resentment had calcified into a dull, heavy numbness. There was never a thank you text. There was never an acknowledgement of the transfer. The money simply disappeared from my life and kept a roof over theirs. I used to tell myself that this was just what good daughters did. Family is supposed to be unconditional, right? You step up when things get hard. But somewhere along the line, the emergency became a permanent expectation. I stopped being their daughter and seamlessly transitioned into their personal, automated teller machine. I paid for their peace of mind while sacrificing my own. I lived in a modest apartment. I drove a 6-year-old car. I carefully budgeted my groceries. Meanwhile, my parents continued to live in their spacious, 4-bedroom suburban home, watering their pristine front lawn and waving at the neighbors as if they were the picture of American stability. They maintained the illusion of upper-middle-class success, and I funded it from the shadows. If I ever brought it up, or if I ever hinted that the financial strain was getting heavy for me, the atmosphere would immediately turn icy. My mother had a master's degree in emotional manipulation. She would sigh, press her hand to her chest, and say things like, "Well, we gave you life, Madeline. We sacrificed everything for your education. It is a shame you see family as a burden." And just like that, the trap would snap shut. I would swallow my words, bury my frustration, and go back to work. I convinced myself that keeping the peace was better than facing the incredible guilt they were so good at serving. I was the responsible one. The quiet one. The one who fixed things without asking for a parade. But as the years dragged on, the silence from their end grew louder. It was a suffocating quiet that told me exactly where I stood. I was necessary, but I was not valued. I was an obligation they tolerated because my bank account was tied to their survival. It had always been this way. Long before the mortgage payments started, our family dynamic was written in permanent ink. If I was the shadow that dutifully followed behind, my younger sister Vanessa was the blinding sun. Vanessa is 29, but she has spent her entire life operating under the assumption that the universe owes her a red carpet. When we were kids, the differences in how we were treated were so stark it was almost comical. I remember coming home in high school with a state-level award for a science and drafting competition. I had spent months building a complex architectural model. I walked into the kitchen, placed the heavy glass trophy on the island, and waited. My mother, Cynthia, barely glanced up from her magazine. She gave a polite nod, murmured that it was nice, and told me to move it before it scratched the granite. Later that same week, Vanessa managed to pass her driver's permit test after failing twice. My mother baked a cake, invited the neighbors over, and framed the flimsy paper permit in the hallway. I learned very early on that my best efforts were simply the baseline expectation, while Vanessa's absolute minimum was a cause for wild celebration. My father, Gregory, was no help. He was a passive man who treated conflict like a contagious disease. His entire survival strategy in that house was to keep his head down, read the paper, and agree with whatever Cynthia said. Whenever I tried to express how unfair things felt, he would just pat my shoulder, let out a long sigh, and mumble his favorite phrase, "You know how your mother is, Madeline. Just let it go." Keeping the peace is easier than being right. But keeping the peace always meant I was the one paying the price. When Vanessa grew up, her life became a series of dramatic, self-inflicted disasters. She married young to a guy everyone knew was a walking red flag. When they predictably divorced 3 years later, Vanessa returned home with 2 maxed-out credit cards, a bruised ego, and a mountain of designer clothes. You would have thought she was a war hero returning from a grueling deployment. Cynthia cleared out the biggest guest room, cooked her favorite meals every night, and viciously defended her to anyone who dared to gossip. I remember visiting one weekend and hearing my mother tell a neighbor on the porch, "Poor Vanessa is just going through such a tragedy. She has such a fragile, beautiful soul." Meanwhile, I was living in a cramped studio apartment, working 60-hour weeks to secure my promotion at the firm. I offered to take Vanessa out to dinner to cheer her up, but she rolled her eyes and said my car smelled too much like cheap coffee. Later that night, as I was packing to leave, I overheard my mother in the kitchen talking to my dad. She said, "Madeline just does not understand real struggle. She is so cold, so disconnected from us." I stood in the hallway, gripping my overnight bag, feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. Paying for my own college, building my own career from nothing, and never asking them for a single dime was not a struggle. It was just me being cold. Living a few hours away in Albany gave me the physical distance I needed to survive, but in their eyes, it was just further proof of my supposed lack of family loyalty. I was the reliable, boring background character in the grand, dramatic play of Vanessa's life. The financial leash that bound me to them was forged exactly 3 years ago. It started with a phone call in the middle of the night, the kind that makes your heart hammer against your ribs before you even answer. It was my father. His voice was shaking. He told me he had been let go from his management job during a corporate restructuring. They had no savings. My mother had maxed out their emergency credit lines to fund a kitchen remodel they absolutely did not need. They were 3 months behind on the mortgage, and the bank was threatening foreclosure. I drove down the very next morning. I sat in that brand new, ridiculously expensive kitchen, looking at the foreclosure notices spread across the marble island. Cynthia was in full hysterics, crying into a tissue, talking about how the humiliation would kill her, how the neighbors would laugh, how Vanessa's delicate mental state could not handle losing her childhood home. Not once did they ask how taking on a massive monthly payment would affect my life, my savings, or my future. It was just assumed that I would fix it. "Madeline is the practical one," Cynthia kept saying through her dramatic sobs. "Madeline always figures it out." And God help me, I did. I had a solid savings account and a great salary. I rationalized it. I told myself it was a temporary setback. I would cover the mortgage until my dad found a new job. So, I sat down at my father's desktop computer in his home office. I logged into the bank's online portal. I set up a direct link between my primary checking account and their mortgage account to ensure the payments would clear automatically every month, preventing any further late fees. But I made a mistake. A massive, catastrophic mistake born out of foolish trust. Because my father was terrible with technology, I left the joint portal access open on his computer. I checked the box that said "Remember my device." I saved my digital authorization credentials on his desktop so he could easily log in and check the remaining balance without needing to call me for 2-factor authentication codes every single time. It was supposed to be a gesture of transparency. I was treating them like responsible adults. Months turned into a year. A year turned into 3. My father eventually got a lower-paying consulting gig, but the conversation about taking the mortgage back never happened. Whenever I brought it up, the excuses flowed like water. "The inflation is too high right now. Vanessa needs help with her medical bills. We are just trying to build our emergency fund back up, sweetie. Please do not pressure us." So, the auto-pay remained. The digital bridge between my hard-earned money and their secure lifestyle stayed wide open. I trusted that they would never cross the line. I believed that despite their flaws, they were still my parents. They would never actively harm me. I had no idea I had just handed them the keys to my financial execution. September arrived in Albany with a crisp chill in the air, bringing with it the changing of the leaves and the fast-approaching date of my parents' 35th wedding anniversary. For a family so obsessed with appearances, 35 years was not just a milestone, it was a theatrical production. I knew Cynthia had been planning it for months. I had heard whispers of caterers and floral arrangements through brief, strained phone calls with my father. I had even blocked out the weekend on my work calendar, assuming I would make the drive down, sit quietly at the edge of the table, and pay for the champagne. Then, exactly 1 week before the event, my phone rang. It was Cynthia. The moment I answered, I could hear the artificial sweetness in her voice. It was that overly careful, honey-dripping tone she only used when she was about to deliver a calculated insult. "Madeline, darling, how is work? Are you eating well?" she began. We exchanged the mandatory, hollow pleasantries for about 2 minutes before she took a deep breath and pivoted. "Listen, sweetheart, your father and I have been finalizing the seating arrangements for the anniversary dinner next Saturday. We booked that lovely French place downtown, you know, the one with the glass conservatory?" I murmured a yes, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Well," she continued, her voice practically vibrating with fake regret. "The thing is, they have incredibly strict fire codes. There are only so many seats available in the private dining room. Things got so complicated with your father's cousins and the people from my country club confirming at the very last minute. We really had to make some hard choices to keep it an intimate gathering." My vocal cords froze. I sat at my desk, staring blindly at a set of blueprints on my monitor. The silence stretched. "I know you are so busy with your projects anyway," Cynthia said quickly, filling the quiet. "And, honestly, it is going to be a lot of older couples talking about boring retirement things. You would be miserable. We hope you understand it is absolutely nothing personal. We love you so much." She was uninviting me. She was actively banning me from my own parents' 35th anniversary to make room for country club acquaintances. I felt a hot prickle behind my eyes, but I forced my voice to remain completely flat, completely steady. "It is fine," I said. "I have a deadline coming up anyway. Enjoy the night." "Oh, thank you for being so mature about this, Madeline," she chirped, the relief so obvious it made my stomach turn. "We will send you pictures." I hung up the phone and just sat there, listening to the hum of the office air conditioner. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. A text message from Vanessa. It read, "Mom told me you are not coming next week. Don't make a big deal out of it and ruin their vibe, okay? It is their special day." Followed by a kissing face emoji. It was not a message of comfort. It was a warning to stay in my lane. It was confirmation that I was excluded, and she was thrilled about it. I spent the rest of the week walking around like a ghost. At my architectural firm, my usually sharp focus was shattered. I stared at CD drawings without seeing the lines. It was my coworker, Naomi, who finally broke through the fog. Naomi had shared the cubicle wall with me for 2 years. She was a no-nonsense, incredibly observant woman who never asked unnecessary questions, but always knew when the energy shifted. On Thursday evening, as the office emptied out, she walked over, leaned against my desk, and said, "You look like you are planning a murder or attending a funeral. Let's go get coffee." I did not argue. We walked to the little cafe on the corner. The wind outside was biting, matching the coldness settling in my chest. We sat in a quiet booth, and after a few minutes of staring at my black coffee, the whole pathetic story spilled out of me. I told her about the mortgage payments I had been making for 3 years. I told her about the phone call with Cynthia. I told her about the limited seating excuse and Vanessa's condescending text message. Naomi did not offer me empty sympathy. She did not pat my hand and tell me families are just complicated. She slowly stirred her tea, looked me dead in the eyes, and delivered a sentence that felt like a slap across the face. "Madeline," she said, her voice low and steady. "They only love the version of you that pays the bills." I flinched. I wanted to defend them. I wanted to say that my dad was just stressed, or that my mom just lacked social awareness. But the words died in my throat because Naomi was absolutely right. I was not a daughter. I was a utility. a service provider. Stop fixing everything, Naomi added, taking a sip of her tea. Let them sit in the mess they make. I nodded, but breaking decades of conditioning is not that simple. The guilt was a heavy chain. Even after that conversation, a pathetic, desperate part of me still wanted to prove I was a good daughter. That night, I went online and ordered a beautiful, heavy silver photo frame. I had it custom engraved with the words, 35 years of love. I paid for overnight shipping to their house. It was a peace offering. A quiet way of saying I was still there, even if I was not allowed at the table. 3 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon, a familiar-looking cardboard box appeared at my apartment door. The return label was written in my mother's flawless, looping handwriting. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. Inside was the exact same silver frame, completely untouched, still in its bubble wrap. Tucked neatly under the frame was a bright yellow sticky note. It read, "We already have too much clutter in the house. Please do not waste your money on things like this." I stood in my hallway holding the box. I did not cry. The sadness had finally burned itself out, leaving nothing but a dry, hollow crater. The message was crystal clear. My efforts were unnecessary. My presence was a nuisance. I was nothing to them. Saturday night arrived. The night of the anniversary dinner. I stayed in my apartment, determined to keep my mind occupied. I deep-cleaned my kitchen, scrubbed the bathroom grout, and organized my bookshelves. I told myself I did not care what they were doing. I told myself I was enjoying a peaceful, quiet evening alone. By 9 o'clock, I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. The apartment was completely silent. Without thinking, muscle memory took over, and I unlocked my phone. I opened my social media feed. I did not even have to scroll. The algorithm knew exactly what to put at the very top of my screen. It was a photo posted by Vanessa just 20 minutes earlier. The image loaded, crisp and bright, filling my screen with golden light. It was taken outside the expensive French restaurant downtown. The first thing I noticed was the sheer volume of people. There had to be at least 40 people spilling out onto the cobblestone sidewalk. There were cousins I hadn't seen in a decade, my mother's golfing friends, my father's old drinking buddies, even the neighbors from 3 doors down. Everyone was dressed up, holding glasses of champagne, smiling brightly at the camera. Right in the center stood Cynthia and Gregory, beaming, looking like royalty. And right next to them, her arm wrapped tightly around my mother's waist, was Vanessa. I stared at the screen, my eyes tracing over the faces. The lie about strict fire codes and limited seating echoed in my head. There was plenty of room. There was room for neighbors. There was room for distant acquaintances. There just was not room for me. Then, I read the caption Vanessa had typed underneath the photo. True family. We finally have absolutely everyone together to celebrate the best parents in the world. Something inside my brain snapped. It was a physical sensation, like a thick, heavy rope finally giving way under too much tension. For 32 years, I had swallowed my pride. For 32 years, I had taken the back seat. For 3 years, I had drained my savings to keep a roof over the heads of the very people smiling in that photograph. They were drinking expensive champagne and playing the perfect family, entirely funded by my silent sacrifice. The sadness was completely gone. The guilt evaporated. In their place, a freezing, calculating rage washed over me. My hands were perfectly steady. I clicked on the comment box beneath the photo. I did not write a long, emotional paragraph. I did not complain about being uninvited. I simply typed the absolute, undeniable truth. Congrats on 35 years. I wrote. By the way, the mortgage and the property taxes are officially all yours now. Enjoy the night. I read it once. Then I hit send. I watched my comment appear right below Vanessa's perfect caption. I did not close the app. I simply set the phone down on the coffee table, leaned back into the cushions of my couch, and stared at it. I counted the seconds in my head. The silence in my apartment was profound, but it felt electric. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. 3 minutes. At exactly the 5-minute mark, the screen of my phone lit up, followed by a violent vibration. The post had been deleted. And then, the barrage began. The phone vibrated continuously, inching its way across the glass table. Missed call from Cynthia. Missed call from Vanessa. Text message from Gregory. Another missed call from Cynthia. The screen flashed red and white in the dark room, a chaotic storm of panic from 3 people who had suddenly realized their free ride was over. I sat there, completely still, watching the panic unfold. I did not reach for the phone. For the first time in my life, I let them ring. Thank you for watching this far. If you're feeling pleased and supportive of Madeline's decision, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with the name of the city you live in. Every comment helps the video reach a wider audience. Thank you so much. The morning after the anniversary party, I woke up before the sun. The apartment was completely silent, filled with the gray, early morning light. I did not have a hangover from alcohol, but I had an emotional hangover that made my limbs feel heavy and my mind unnervingly sharp. I walked into the kitchen, made a strong pot of black coffee, and sat down at my small dining table. I opened my laptop. The glow of the screen illuminated my face as I navigated to my bank's website. I typed in my password, answered the security question, and clicked on the Scheduled Transfers tab. There it was. The automatic monthly payment, set to deduct a massive sum from my account in exactly 2 weeks, just like it had for the past 3 years. The destination account was listed under my father's name. I hovered the mouse cursor over the small icon that said Cancel Autopay. For a fraction of a second, the old, conditioned guilt flared up in my chest. What if they lose the house? What if my mother has a panic attack? But then, the image of that photograph flashed in my mind. Dozens of people. Champagne. Golden lights. True family. I clicked cancel. A pop-up box appeared, asking me to confirm the cancellation. I clicked yes. The screen refreshed. The scheduled payment vanished. It was gone. I leaned back in my chair and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 3 years. The physical sensation of relief was overwhelming. It felt as though a heavy, suffocating weight had been lifted off my ribcage. For the first time in my adult life, my money was entirely my own. The first week of silence was peaceful. The second week, however, began to hum with consequence. By mid-September, the missed payment triggered the bank's automated collection system. That Tuesday morning, my phone lit up with a text message from Cynthia. It was written with feigned confusion, the kind that hides an accusation beneath a thin layer of politeness. Madeline, she wrote. The bank keeps calling your father. They said something about a missed payment. Is everything all right with your account? Please check it, we do not want a late fee. I read the message twice. I did not reply. I simply locked my screen and went back to work. A few hours later, she sent another one. Madeline, we did not want to bother you, but they say it is urgent. Please call me back. The word urgent was her favorite tool to manipulate my guilt. I could almost hear her theatrical sigh through the text, the practiced tone of a mother who firmly believed that love meant total control. I deleted the thread. By Friday, Vanessa joined the campaign. She did not text me directly, of course. She took to social media. A new post appeared on her timeline, set to public so everyone could see it. It was a picture of a generic sad quote about betrayal. Her caption read, "Some people forget who raised them." It is heartbreaking when someone you love turns their back on family when things get a little inconvenient. The comments rolled in predictably. Her friends and the country club neighbors flooded the post with sympathy, validation, and concern. "Stay strong, Vanessa," someone wrote. "Family can hurt the most," another chimed in. Vanessa replied to every single comment with heart emojis and crying faces, perfectly playing the role she had spent her life perfecting. The devoted daughter, the loyal sister, the victim of someone else's coldness. I scrolled through the thread once, closed the app, and let my phone fall onto the couch. I refused to give them the satisfaction of a response. I realized that my silence was driving them crazy because it was the one thing they could not control. They were throwing rocks into a bottomless well, waiting for a splash that was never going to come. But ignoring them did not stop the reality of what they had done from catching up to me. October arrived, bringing a bitter wind that stripped the trees bare across Albany. It had been nearly a month since I canceled the autopay. The phone calls from my family had slowed down, replaced by an ominous, heavy silence. I thought the worst of it was over. I assumed the bank was simply harassing them for the standard late fees, and they were finally realizing they had to pay for their own lives. I was wrong. The nightmare had not even started. It was a Tuesday evening. I was walking up the stairs to my apartment, exhausted from a long day at the architectural firm. I unlocked my mailbox in the lobby and pulled out a stack of junk mail. Tucked in the middle of the grocery flyers was a thick, heavy envelope. The return address belonged to my bank, but it was from a corporate branch I did not recognize, stamped with red ink indicating it was certified mail. I frowned. I carried the mail upstairs, tossed my keys on the counter, and tore the thick paper open. I pulled out a heavy stack of stapled documents. At first glance, it looked like standard promotional garbage. But then my eyes caught the bold text printed across the top of the first page. Notice of default and refinance liability. I froze. I set my bag down on the floor and spread the papers across my kitchen island. I started reading the dense legal jargon, tracing the lines with my index finger to make sure my tired eyes were not playing tricks on me. My name was printed explicitly in bold letters on the second page: Madeline Bennett, guarantor and co-borrower. For a moment, all the air left the room. My heart began to hammer violently against my ribs. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The letter was not about a missed mortgage payment on the original loan. It was a notification regarding a massive, high-interest refinance loan taken out against my parents' house. The numbers on the page blurred, and I had to blink hard to focus. The principal amount of the new loan was $150,000. $150,000. And according to this document, it was fully guaranteed by my name, my credit, and my financial history. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself. The house had been refinanced 2 months earlier, in July. I frantically flipped through the remaining pages, searching for an error, a typo, a misprint, anything to prove this was a massive bureaucratic mistake. I had not signed anything. I had not been to a bank branch. I had not spoken to a loan officer. But there it was. On the final page of the packet, printed clearly next to my father's name and my mother's name, was an electronic signature authorization. It was a digital stamp, bearing my exact identification sequence and the email address tied to the joint account portal I had set up 3 years ago. My legs gave out, and I sank into one of the kitchen stools. The reality of the situation crashed over me like a freezing wave. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a late fee. My parents had not just leaned on my financial help, they had actively crossed the line into felony theft. They had used the very trust one had built with them as a weapon to chain me to a massive, crippling debt. All the pieces suddenly clicked together. The sudden influx of cash to throw a lavish, 40-person anniversary party at an expensive French restaurant. The absolute panic when I canceled the autopay. They had drained the equity of the house, taken out a massive loan in my name, and expected me to just keep paying the monthly installments blindly, completely unaware that I was servicing a $150,000 fraud. I sat alone in my kitchen as the sun went down, leaving the apartment in total darkness. The sadness and the grief for my family were completely gone. What replaced it was something cold, sharp, and incredibly dangerous. I did not sleep that night. I sat on my living room floor surrounded by printed bank statements, highlighters, and empty coffee mugs. By the time the sun came up on Wednesday morning, my mind was running with surgical precision. At exactly 9 in the morning, I picked up my phone and called the corporate branch number listed on the default notice. After being transferred through 3 different departments and waiting on hold for 20 agonizing minutes, a man with a calm, professional voice answered the line. He introduced himself as Marcus, a senior account manager in the lending division. "Mr. Marcus," I said, my voice eerily steady. "I am calling regarding a notice of default I received yesterday. It references a refinance loan of $150,000. I need you to pull up the file immediately because I never authorized or signed for this loan." There was the sound of rapid typing on the other end of the line. Marcus hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Miss Bennett, I see your file here. The refinance was processed and finalized in mid-July. The primary borrowers listed are Gregory and Cynthia Bennett, with your digital signature authorizing the guarantee. I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. Can you tell me exactly how that digital signature was obtained? I asked. Marcus cleared his throat. It appears the loan documents were executed entirely online. The electronic signature was generated using the secure access credentials and the saved IP address associated with your joint payment portal. The system recognized the device, and the login token is yours. The words struck like a physical blow, even though I already knew the answer. I had left that access open on my father's desktop computer 3 years ago, so he could check the balance. I had checked the box that said remember this device. Someone in that house, my mother, my father, or Vanessa, had logged into the portal, opened the loan application, and deliberately clicked the digital authorization button masquerading as me. If I did not authorize this, and I am claiming fraud, what is the next step? I asked. Marcus grew very cautious. Legally, Miss Bennett, if you are suggesting identity theft by a family member, we have to initiate an internal fraud review. This will involve locking the accounts and potentially escalating the matter to law enforcement. Are you sure you want to proceed? Yes, I said without a single ounce of hesitation. Freeze everything. After I hung up the phone, I opened my laptop and went straight to my email. I bypassed the inbox and clicked on the spam folder. I scrolled back through thousands of junk emails, promotional offers, and newsletters, hunting for July. It took me 20 minutes, but I found them. 2 automated emails from the bank, buried deep in the spam filter. One was dated July 12th, subject line, your loan application has been received. The second was dated July 14th, subject line, congratulations, your refinance documents are signed. I stared at the screen. I had ignored them, assuming they were phishing scams or generic marketing trash. The attached PDF documents in the second email told the entire, sickening story. The timestamps showed that the 2 required verifications, my father's and mine, had cleared within 10 minutes of each other from the exact same IP address. They had not stumbled into this mistake. They had not been confused by the technology. They had planned it. They sat at that computer together and sold my future to buy themselves a few more years of luxury. I printed every single document, every timestamp, and every IP log. I compiled them into a thick manila folder. The paper stack grew heavy, each page absolute proof of betrayal. I was ready for war. I took a half-day off from the architectural firm that afternoon. I did not go home. Instead, I drove straight to the downtown business district and parked outside a sleek, modern office building. I took the elevator to the 8th floor and walked through the glass doors of a firm specializing in real estate law and financial disputes. I had an emergency consultation booked with Victor Hayes, a senior attorney known for his absolute lack of patience for nonsense. Victor's office smelled like old paper, expensive leather, and cold air conditioning. He was a man in his late 50s with sharp eyes and a quiet demeanor. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, gestured for me to sit, and asked how he could help. I did not waste time with tears or emotional backstories. I placed the thick manila folder on his desk and slid it across the polished wood. My parents and my sister forged my digital signature to take out a $150,000 refinance loan on their home, I said flatly. The bank is demanding payment. I need my name removed, and I do not care what happens to them in the process. Victor raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my lack of hysterics. He opened the folder and began to read. The room was completely silent for 15 minutes, save for the sound of paper turning and the distant hum of city traffic outside the window. He reviewed the original mortgage agreement, the spam emails, the IP logs, and the bank's notice of default. When he finally reached the last page, he closed the folder, folded his hands on the desk, and looked at me steadily. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice grave. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is textbook wire fraud and identity theft. The electronic authorization was deliberately reused without your consent to secure a massive financial asset. Whoever clicked that button on that computer committed a federal offense." "I know," I replied, my voice unwavering. What do we do? Victor explained the architecture of the legal demolition we were about to begin. We would draft a formal affidavit of forgery. We would submit a comprehensive fraud dispute directly to the bank's legal department, demanding an immediate freeze on all assets tied to the property. He also explained that the bank would not just absorb a $150,000 loss. Once they verified the fraud, they would aggressively pursue the actual signatories, my parents, for immediate repayment and likely refer the forgery to the district attorney. You need to understand, Victor said softly, leaning forward. Once I file these papers, there is no taking it back. The bank will likely foreclose on the house to recoup their losses. Your parents could face criminal charges. It will destroy whatever family dynamic you have left. Are you absolutely certain you want to pull this trigger? I thought about the 35 years of being treated like a shadow. I thought about the anniversary party. I thought about the returned silver picture frame. I thought about my mother's fake tears and Vanessa's smug social media posts. The family dynamic was destroyed a long time ago, Victor, I said, standing up and buttoning my coat. Build the guillotine. I will pay whatever your retainer is. Just get my name off that debt. I walked out of his office feeling a strange, hollow sense of power. I was no longer the sad, invisible daughter waiting for an invitation to the dinner table. I was the architect of my own rescue, and I was about to tear their perfect house down to the studs. The following week was a masterclass in bureaucratic warfare. Under Victor's aggressive guidance, I moved with absolute, clinical precision. I filed a police report for identity theft in Albany, detailing the unauthorized use of my credentials. I placed a total freeze on my credit with all 3 major bureaus. Victor fired off a heavily documented legal dispute to the corporate fraud division of the bank, officially declaring my signature forged and demanding the immediate removal of my liability. The moment that dispute landed on the bank's desk, the invisible scales of power completely flipped. For years, the bank had viewed me as the reliable safety net. Now, they realized their $150,000 loan was resting on a foundation of criminal fraud. And banks do not play nicely when their money is threatened. The fraud department took over the account, freezing my parents' access to any remaining equity and launching a full internal investigation. The silence from my family shattered violently. It started on a Thursday afternoon. My phone, which had been blissfully quiet, suddenly began lighting up with incoming calls. First, it was Gregory. He called 3 times in a row, leaving no voicemail. An hour later, Cynthia called. Then Vanessa. I watched their names flash across my screen, letting every single one go to voicemail. When I finally checked the messages that evening, the sheer panic in their voices was palpable. The arrogant, manipulative tone Cynthia usually employed was completely gone, replaced by genuine, trembling fear. Madeline, Cynthia's voice cracked through the phone speaker. Madeline, please pick up. The bank's fraud department just called your father. They're asking insane questions about IP addresses and the refinance. They froze our checking account. Madeline, what did you do? Please, call me back immediately, we are terrified. The next voicemail was from Gregory. For a man who had spent his life avoiding conflict, he sounded completely broken. Maddie, he mumbled, sounding older than his years. The bank says you filed a police report. Sweetheart, please, let's just talk about this. We can fix it. Don't involve the police. You are going to ruin us. I listened to the messages while standing in my kitchen, drinking a glass of water. I felt no pity. I felt no guilt. They were not terrified because they had hurt me. They were terrified because they had finally been caught. They had spent my entire life assuming I would just absorb whatever abuse they threw at me, right up to a 6-figure fraudulent debt. They thought my loyalty was a bottomless well they could draw from forever. They were about to learn that the well had run dry, and the ground beneath them was caving in. I did not return a single call. I let them sit in the agonizing, suffocating uncertainty that they had created for themselves. Let them explain it to the fraud investigators. Let them explain it to the police. I had spent 3 years paying for their peace of mind. It was time they paid for their own sins. I went to bed that night and, for the first time in months, I slept a full 8 hours, completely undisturbed by the ghosts of my family. The absolute panic from my family continued to escalate through the first week of November. The bank's legal department was moving aggressively. They had issued a formal demand for my parents to produce proof of authorization for the digital signature, which, of course, they could not do. The walls were rapidly closing in on the grand, suburban illusion Cynthia had spent her life building. On a chilly Wednesday morning, a text message popped up on my phone. It was from Vanessa. It was a masterclass in backtracking. The girl who had publicly shamed me on social media just a month prior was suddenly trying to play the role of the desperate peacemaker. Maddie, the text read. Things are getting really out of control here. Mom is a total wreck. She has barely slept in days. Dad is having chest pains from the stress. Please, this has to be a huge misunderstanding. The bank is threatening to take the house. Mom wants to have brunch this Sunday. Just the four of us. A neutral place. Please come. It is time to talk and clear the air as a family. I stared at the message. The audacity was almost breathtaking. After forging my name to steal $150,000, after banning me from their anniversary, after treating me like dirt for decades, they still believed they could sit me down over pancakes and emotionally manipulate me into withdrawing a federal fraud claim. They thought a brunch could fix a felony. I typed a reply, keeping it as brief and cold as possible. Where and when? 10 seconds later, Vanessa sent the address of an upscale cafe in a town halfway between Albany and their house, along with a time, Sunday at 10 in the morning. I replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji. I did not agree to meet them because I wanted to reconcile. I did not want apologies, and I certainly did not want to hug them and cry. I agreed to meet them because I wanted to look them in the eyes when the final door slammed shut. I wanted to deliver the reality check in person. I spent Saturday evening preparing. I did not try on different outfits to look nice. I wore a simple black sweater and jeans. I did not practice a speech. Instead, I went to my desk and opened my leather briefcase. I took out a crisp, new manila folder. Inside, I placed a copy of the forged loan agreement. I placed a copy of the IP logs showing the signature came from their home computer. I placed a copy of the police report with the case number highlighted in bright yellow ink. And finally, I placed a copy of the legal letter Victor had drafted, explicitly stating that I was completely severing all financial and legal ties to Richard and Cynthia Bennett. I closed the folder and ran my hand over the smooth cardboard. It felt like a weapon. An absolute, undeniable weapon of truth. I woke up early on Sunday, the sky outside gray and heavy with the promise of winter snow. I drove the hour and a half to the cafe in complete silence, the heater blasting against my legs. I did not feel nervous. My hands were steady on the steering wheel. The little girl who used to cry in her bedroom because her mother did not praise her science project was dead. The woman driving down the highway was an architect, and she was on her way to execute a controlled demolition. I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early. The place smelled overwhelmingly of roasted coffee beans and burnt cinnamon, a warm, comforting scent that heavily contrasted with the freezing tension in my chest. I chose a large booth in the back corner, away from the windows. I placed the manila folder flat on the table, ordered a black coffee, and waited. Promptly at 10 o'clock, the door chimed, and they walked in. Cynthia led the way. She was dressed meticulously, her hair perfectly styled, wearing a cashmere coat as if a flawless appearance could somehow rewrite reality. Gregory followed behind her, his shoulders slumped, his eyes refusing to leave the floor tiles. Vanessa brought up the rear, clutching her designer purse like a shield, her usual arrogant swagger completely evaporated. They looked like people walking to the gallows. They slid into the booth opposite me. For a long, agonizing moment, no one spoke. The hum of the espresso machine behind the counter filled the silence. Cynthia offered a fragile, wavering smile. Madeline, darling. Thank you so much for coming. You look well. Let's skip the pleasantries, Cynthia, I said, my voice completely flat. Why am I here? Vanessa shifted nervously. Maddie, things just got really messy. We are family. Families make mistakes, but they do not call the police on each other. We need you to call the bank and tell them it was a mix-up. Tell them you gave Dad permission to click the button. I stared at her. The sheer entitlement was staggering. You want me to lie to a federal bank investigator, I said slowly, to cover up the fact that you stole my identity to take out a $150,000 loan? Keep your voice down, Cynthia hissed, her eyes darting around the cafe to see if anyone was listening. Madeline, please. We only did it to protect the house. We needed the equity to pay off some debts. We fully intended to pay the monthly installments ourselves. We never meant to hurt you. I reached across the table and flipped open the manila folder. I slid the printed IP logs and the forged digital signature page toward them. You did not intend to hurt me? I asked, tapping the paper. You logged into my account from your living room. You checked a box legally binding me to massive debt. You threw a massive anniversary party with the stolen money and uninvited me because I did not fit your aesthetic. You only care now because I caught you, and the bank cut off the money supply. Gregory finally looked up, his eyes red. Maddie, if you do not stop this investigation, the bank is going to take the house. We will have nowhere to go. Vanessa will have nowhere to go. Please. You have to save us. I looked at my father, the man who had stayed silent my entire life to keep the peace. You had 3 years to save yourselves while I paid your mortgage, I said coldly. Instead, you stole from me. I slid the final paper across the table. It was the letter from Victor. It is over, I said, gathering my purse and standing up. My lawyer has officially removed my name from the liability. The fraud case is in the hands of the district attorney and the bank. Whatever happens to the house and whatever happens to you legally is entirely your own problem. Do not ever contact me again. Madeline, you cannot do this. Cynthia cried out, her voice breaking, genuine tears finally spilling down her perfectly powdered cheeks. You are destroying this family. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing but a hollow sense of finality. No, Cynthia, I replied quietly. I am just surviving it. I placed a $20 bill on the table for the coffee, turned around, and walked out the glass doors into the freezing November wind. I did not look back. The destruction of the Bennett family illusion happened with terrifying speed. Once the bank confirmed the digital forgery and realized I was legally protected by the fraud statutes, they brought the hammer down on my parents with zero mercy. I did not have to lift another finger. Victor simply forwarded me the legal updates as they unfolded over the next 3 months. I watched the collapse from a safe distance, a spectator to the avalanche they had triggered themselves. Without my monthly auto pay, and with their assets completely frozen by the fraud investigation, the new $150,000 mortgage defaulted almost immediately. Banks do not negotiate with people who commit wire fraud. The foreclosure process was expedited. Right before Christmas, the ultimate nightmare Cynthia had spent her life trying to avoid became a public reality. A bright red bank-owned sticker was slapped over the front door lock. The house, the pristine suburban fortress where I had always been treated like a second-class citizen, was repossessed. Neighbors stood on their porches and watched as moving trucks hauled away the expensive furniture, the heavy oak dining table where I was not allowed to sit, and the remnants of a 35-year marriage built on lies. Vanessa's downfall was even more spectacular. The bank's investigators traced the exact time the digital signature was executed. Through deposition, Gregory cracked under pressure and admitted that Vanessa was the one who physically typed the information into the computer while Cynthia watched. The bank filed a massive civil suit against Vanessa for financial misrepresentation. The girl who had mocked me, who had posted about family loyalty on social media, found herself drowning in legal fees, her reputation ruined. Last I heard from Victor, she was sleeping on a pull-out couch in a cramped apartment across town, completely alienated from the friends who used to praise her online. In late January, my phone buzzed with a voicemail. The caller ID was a random number, but I recognized the voice immediately. It was Cynthia. The background was quiet, lacking the usual hum of her spacious kitchen. Her voice was a brittle, venomous whisper. "I hope you are happy, Madeline," she said, her tone dripping with toxic bitterness. "The bank took the house. Your father and I are renting a terrible little condo. Vanessa is facing a lawsuit. You had the power to stop this. You could have just helped us. You destroyed everything to prove a point. You are a cold, selfish girl, and you will die alone. The voicemail clicked off. I stood in my kitchen, listening to the silence of my apartment. I did not feel a spike of anger. I did not feel the urge to call her back and scream. I just felt an overwhelming sense of pity. Even after losing everything, even after committing a felony, she was utterly incapable of taking responsibility. In her mind, the villain would always be the ATM that stopped dispensing cash. I deleted the voicemail. I went into my phone settings, blocked the random number, and set my phone down. The ghost of Cynthia Bennett was finally exorcised from my life. The first week of February, I packed up my life in Albany and drove 4 hours west. I moved into a new apartment in Rochester, New York. It was a smaller city, a fresh start, and a place where no one knew my last name or the baggage attached to it. The apartment was modest. I bought cheap, secondhand furniture and spent my weekends painting the walls and assembling bookshelves. It was not a grand, 4-bedroom suburban estate. There was no pristine front lawn or expensive French dining room. But for the first time in my 32 years on this earth, every single object in the room, the roof over my head, and the money in my bank account belonged solely to me. There were no more automated mortgage deductions draining my life. There were no more manipulative phone calls demanding my help. There was no more waiting in the shadows, hoping to be noticed by people who were biologically incapable of loving me. The silence in the apartment was profound, but it was no longer a lonely silence. It was the sound of absolute freedom. I spent my mornings brewing coffee, standing by the large window in my living room, watching the thick Rochester snow fall silently over the city streets. I often thought about a phrase my mother used to repeat whenever she was tending to her immaculate garden back at the old house. She used to look out at the frost and say, "You cannot grow anything in the cold." She was wrong. Some things grow best in the cold. Boundaries, clarity, self-respect. Victor emailed me the final closure documents from the bank in late February. My name was permanently cleared from the fraudulent loan. The liability rested entirely on the ashes of my former family. I replied to Victor with a simple thank you and archived the email. The past was officially sealed. My life now is remarkably boring, and I guard that boredom with everything I have. I go to my new architectural firm, I design buildings, I pay my own bills, and I sleep 8 hours a night without the fear of emergency phone calls. I no longer measure my worth by how much I can sacrifice for people who do not care about me. Peace, I have realized, was the absolute most expensive thing I ever bought. It cost me my parents, my sister, and my childhood home. But standing here in the quiet, looking out at the snow, I know it was worth every single penny. Looking out at the snow falling over Rochester, I finally feel free. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I wonder if I went too far by letting the bank take the house and letting my sister face criminal charges. So, I have to ask you, was I wrong for completely walking away and letting the law destroy the only family I had, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If you enjoyed this journey and want to hear more crazy family drama and revenge stories, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next video.